Seeds of doubt? The lecture hall buzzed with excited chatter as Professor Harmon displayed images of grand structures that had withstood centuries. Nora Winters leaned forward in her seat, sketchbook open, fingers stained with graphite, tracked every detail of the ancient Roman aqueducts projected on the screen. "These structures tell stories," Professor Harmon said, pacing across the front of the hall. "They carry the whispers of generations." Nora scribbled notes frantically, her handwriting a hurried dance across the page. Architecture wasn't just her major, it was her language, her way of understanding the world. While other students shifted restlessly in their seats, Nora was transfixed. "Someone's enthusiastic," came a whispered voice beside her. Slid into the empty seat, his designer backpack landing with a soft thud. His smile carried the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. "You would be too if you were paying attention," Nora whispered back. But she couldn't help returning his smile. Julian Hayes was everything Nora wasn't: polished, connected, and born into the architectural dynasty of Hayes and Associates. Father's firm had reshaped skylines across 3 continents. Julian wore this legacy like a comfortable sweater, never too tight, never constricting. When class ended, Julian lingered by her desk. "Coffee? I need someone to explain why I should care about 1,000-year-old water pipes." Her coffee date turned into dinner. Dinner turned into midnight walks across campus. Walks turned into weekends spent sketching buildings together, Julian with technical precision, Nora with passionate creativity. "Do you see buildings like they're alive?" Julian told her one evening as they sat on the rooftop of the arts building. Campus spread below them like a miniature model. "It's strange. They are alive," Nora insisted. "They breathe, they age, they adapt. The best ones have souls." Julian laughed, but his eyes held genuine affection. "This is why I like you, Winters. You're different. Different." The word followed. Nora, through their relationship, different became unusual, became idealistic, became impractical. The changes were subtle, appearing in comments about her scholarship status, or her thrift store clothes, or her passionate defenses of preserving historical buildings rather than replacing them. The Hayes approach has always been forward-looking. Julian would say when they disagreed, "Dad says nostalgia doesn't pay the bills." 3 months into their relationship, Julian received an internship at his father's firm. Nora brought champagne to celebrate, only to find him packing his expensive textbooks into boxes. "They want me to start immediately," he explained, not meeting her eyes. "It's an incredible opportunity. It's wonderful," Nora said, setting the champagne down. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow." Julian finally looked at her, and there was something else. The hallway outside Julian's apartment was quiet as Nora stood, stunned, clutching the unopened champagne bottle. "You've been a sweet distraction," Julian had said, his voice gentle but firm. "But I'm stepping into my real life now. My father has expectations, you understand." "No," Nora had replied, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. "I don't." Julian's expression had softened with pity. "Come on, Nora. You're brilliant in your own way, but you'll never fit into my world. The Hayes name means something we build the future, not preserve the past." Walking back to her small campus apartment, Nora's steps grew more determined with each block. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "You'll find someone who appreciates your unique perspective." Unique perspective. Different. Sweet distraction in her apartment. Nora placed the champagne on her desk next to her sketches, detailed plans for restoring an abandoned historic theater downtown. A project her professors had called visionary, but financially unrealistic. She looked at the bottle, then at her drawings. Tomorrow, she would cry. Tonight, she would make new plans. Rising from ashes, the rain hammered against the windows of the small office space in Lisbon, but Nora barely noticed. 6 years had passed since the day Julian Hayes had deemed her unworthy of his world, and those years had transformed her. Stood before a large blueprint spread across a weathered oak table, her finger tracing the outline of a 17th century monastery that a developer wanted to convert into luxury apartments. "They'll destroy the original foundation if they proceed with this design," she explained to her small team. "The soul of the building will be lost." Teresa Oliveira, her Portuguese colleague, nodded. But the developer has deep pockets and friends. In the city council, then we'll need to make a better case, Nora replied, determination hardening her voice. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and circled a section of the blueprint. We'll show them how preservation can be profitable. Authenticity sells. After graduating with honors, Nora had taken a risk that shocked her peers. Instead of seeking employment at prestigious American firms, she'd applied for a fellowship in historical preservation that took her across Europe. While classmates chased sleek skyscrapers, Nora fell in love with forgotten spaces, the chapels, theaters, and marketplaces that held centuries of human stories. Her first major success came in Prague, where she developed an innovative approach to reinforcing a crumbling medieval bridge without compromising its historical integrity. The method saved the city millions and preserved a cultural landmark. Articles were written. Phones began to ring. By her third year abroad, Nora had established a reputation as someone who could speak both languages, the poetry of historical architecture and the prose of modern economic reality. Her small consultancy grew, specializing in what she called respectful restoration, preserving the past while making it viable for the future. Miss Winters, her assistant Raphael, appeared in the doorway. There's someone here to see you. Doesn't have an appointment, but... double quotes. Raphael lowered his voice. He's very insistent. Nora looked up, ready to refuse the interruption, when a tall figure appeared behind Raphael. The man wore a simple charcoal suit that Nora's trained eye recognized as bespoke. His face bore the weathered handsomeness of someone who spent time outdoors despite his obvious wealth. Most striking were his eyes deep blue and keenly observant. Eamon Blackwood, he introduced himself, his Irish accent soft but distinct. I apologize for the intrusion, but I've just flown in from Dublin specifically to meet you. Nora raised an eyebrow. Regarding? The Palacio Abandonado. I understand you've submitted a proposal for its restoration. The Palacio Abandonado, Abandoned Palace, was Lisbon's most notorious architectural white elephant. Once magnificent, the 18th century structure had deteriorated over decades of neglect and ownership disputes. Nora's proposal for its revival had been ambitious to the point of audacity, she said cautiously. Are you with the Historical Commission? Imán smiled, a warm expression that transformed his serious face. No, I own it. As of yesterday, silence fell over the room. The Palacio had been caught in legal limbo for years. Acquiring it would have required extraordinary resources and influence. Perhaps we could discuss your vision, Imán continued. Seemingly unaware of the effect his words had on Nora and her team, I believe we may share similar perspectives on historical preservation. Over the next 3 hours, Nora discovered that Imán Blackwood was unlike any potential client she'd encountered. The son of a stonemason who had made his fortune in sustainable technology, Imán had developed a passion for historical architecture after restoring his family's centuries-old cottage in rural Ireland. Now, he dedicated a significant portion of his wealth to preserving endangered historical structures across Europe.
Ow.
People don't understand that these buildings aren't just stones and timber, Eamon said as they walked through the rain to view the Palacio, the repositories of human ingenuity and spirit. Nora stopped walking, struck by his words. They have souls. Eamon turned to her, raindrops clinging to his dark hair. Exactly. His eyes studied her with sudden intensity. No, when I read your proposal, I recognized something familiar in your approach. You see these buildings as living entities. For the first time in years, Nora felt the strange sensation of being truly seen. Not as the scholarship student, not as the eccentric preservationist, but as someone whose vision mattered. That evening, over dinner at a small fado restaurant, Eamon offered her not just the Palacio project, but a partnership. His foundation would provide the financial backing. She would lead the restoration efforts. Why me? Nora asked, suspicious of generosity after years of fighting for recognition. There are more established firms. Because you understand something crucial, Eamon replied, his voice earnest. The future doesn't require erasing the past. The most sustainable path forward honors what came before. As Nora walked home that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before Julian's rejection possibility, unfurling before her like architectural plans, each pathway leading to something magnificent waiting to be built. Building an empire, the October sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the restored Palacio, now transformed into a cultural center that housed artists' studios, a museum of Portuguese craft traditions, and community spaces that pulsed with life. Nora stood beside the central fountain, watching visitors move through the space with the satisfaction of someone who had helped resurrect something precious from ruin. "They're calling it the model for the future of preservation," Eamon said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. 3 years had passed since their first meeting, and their professional relationship had evolved into an extraordinary partnership. The Blackwood Winters Foundation now oversaw restoration projects across 4 continents, the offices in Lisbon, Dublin, Singapore, and most recently, New York. "Did you see the latest piece in Architectural Digest?" Nora asked, accepting the coffee. "They're calling our approach revolutionary." Eamon laughed. "For suggesting that beautiful old buildings shouldn't be demolished or turned into playgrounds for the ultra-wealthy." He shook his head. "The world has strange definitions of innovation." Their partnership had indeed redefined architectural preservation. Rather than simply restoring buildings to museum-like status or gutting them for luxury developments, they created mixed-use spaces that served communities while honoring historical significance. Local craftspeople were trained in traditional methods to participate in restorations. Economic sustainability was built into each project, ensuring the buildings would remain viable for generations. "The Tokyo project team sent their preliminary assessment," Nora said, scrolling through her tablet. "The old silk factory has more structural damage than we anticipated, but they found something interesting beneath the floorboards. Journals from workers dating back to the 1890s. "Perfect for the community archive we discussed," Eamon replied, his shoulder brushing against hers as he leaned to view the screen. The casual contact sent a now familiar warmth through Nora's body. Their relationship had remained strictly professional for the first 2 years, both of them cautious about complicating their work. But during a late-night discussion in the Singapore office 6 months ago, something had shifted. "What are we afraid of?" Eamon had asked, both of them surrounded by blueprints and half-empty takeout containers. "We build places for people to live, work, and love. Shouldn't we allow ourselves the same?" Since then, they had moved carefully into a relationship as thoughtfully constructed as their buildings, respectful of boundaries, mindful of foundations, but with room for beauty and unexpected discoveries. The New York office sent the final guest list for the Metropolitan Preservation Gala, Nora mentioned, switching to another document on her tablet. "Since we're being honored, they want confirmation on our attendance and speeches." The Metropolitan Preservation Society's annual gala was among the most prestigious events in the architectural world. This year, Blackwood Winters Foundation was receiving their highest honor for the restoration of 5 historic theaters across America, including the very theater Nora had dreamed of saving during her university days. "Will it be strange?" Eamon asked, his perceptive gaze on her face, going back. Nora hadn't returned to the States in nearly 7 years. Success had kept her moving forward, her calendar filled with projects across the globe. She knew what Eamon was really asking. Hayes and Associates was among the sponsors of the gala. Julian would likely be there. "No," she said with genuine ease. That chapter closed a long time ago. Later that evening, in Eamon's apartment overlooking the Tagus River, Nora checked her emails one last time before bed. Among them was a press release announcing Hayes and Associates' latest project, a controversial development that would replace a historic neighborhood with luxury condominiums. The firm was now run by Julian Hayes, who had taken over after his father's retirement. Quoted in the release, Julian stated, "We cannot be held hostage by sentimentality about old buildings. Progress demands that we look forward, not backward." Nora closed her laptop and joined Eamon on the balcony. The lights of Lisbon twinkled below them, a city where Roman ruins stood alongside medieval cathedrals and contemporary structures all coexisting in harmony. "What are you thinking about, Eamon?" asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. How some people never learn to listen to what buildings are trying to tell us, she replied, leaning into his embrace. How grateful I am that you do. As they prepared for the New York Gala in the coming weeks, Nora found herself not dreading the potential reunion with Julian, but curious about it. The girl he had dismissed was gone, replaced by a woman who had built something meaningful, not to prove him wrong, but because she had always seen possibilities where others saw only obstacles. Full circle, the Metropolitan Museum's grand hall glittered with chandeliers and the sparkle of champagne flutes. New York's architectural elite mingled beneath the vaulted ceilings, their conversations creating a symphony of networking, subtle, boasting, and professional gossip. Nora, wearing a midnight blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, now styled in an elegant updo, stood near one of the massive floral arrangements, observing the room with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to navigate such spaces on her own terms. Ms. Winters, your work on the Chicago Athenaeum was simply magnificent, gushed an older woman wearing an impressive collection of diamonds. My husband and I attended the reopening gala. To think that beautiful space was nearly demolished. You, Mrs. Kensington, Nora replied with genuine warmth. The original plasterwork in the main hall was actually what convinced the investors to preserve rather than rebuild. Once they saw those details up close, you made them fall in love with it, Mrs. Kensington finished. That's your gift. The conversation continued. Nora felt, rather than saw, a familiar presence enter her peripheral vision. She didn't need to turn to know who had just noticed her. The slight pause in the ambient conversation, the subtle shift in the energy of the room, these were the tells of unexpected recognition. Julian Hayes stood 15 feet away, his expression transitioning from casual social confidence to stunned disbelief. He looked essentially the same, perhaps, a bit thicker around the middle. His hairline slightly receded, but still handsome in that polished, privileged way. Beside him stood a willowy blonde woman whose diamond ring caught the light with every gesture. Nora excused herself from Mrs. Kensington and moved toward the champagne table, deliberately placing herself in Julian's path. She had not planned this confrontation, but now that it presented itself, she felt a calm curiosity rather than anxiety. Nora? Julian's voice held genuine surprise. Nora Winters. She turned, offering a poised smile. Julian, it's been a while. 7 years, he said, recovering his composure. I had no idea you'd be here. His eyes scanned her gown, her confident posture, clearly recalibrating his mental image of the scholarship student he'd once dismissed. I'm one of the honorees, Nora explained simply. The Blackwood Winners Foundation is receiving recognition for our theater restoration initiative. Julian's expression flickered. Blackwood Winners? You mean you work with Eamon Blackwood? We co-founded the foundation 4 years ago, Nora replied. She extended her hand to the blonde woman. I don't believe we've met. I'm Nora Winters. Vanessa Hayes, the woman replied with practiced grace. Julian's wife. Congratulations, Nora said sincerely. So you're in preservation, Julian commented, his tone carrying a hint of the condescension she remembered. I always knew you'd stick with the historical focus. It's admirable work, though obviously limited in scope compared to new development. Before Nora could respond, a distinguished man approached their small group. Mr. Hayes, your firm's proposal? For the Riverside project is certainly generating discussion. Quite bold to suggest complete demolition of structures with historical designation. Julian straightened, clearly pleased to discuss his work. Bold but necessary, Mr. Thornton. Those buildings have outlived their usefulness. Hayes and Associates builds for the future, not the past. An interesting perspective, Mr. Thornton replied diplomatically. Perhaps you should debate the point with Ms. Winters here. Her approach has proven that historical preservation can actually be more profitable and sustainable than new construction in many cases. Julian's smile tightened. Nora and I go way back, actually. We studied together. She always had ... unique ideas. He turned to her. I'm surprised you managed to find funding for such specialized work. The preservation field isn't known for its profitability. You'd be surprised what's possible when vision meets proper valuation, came a rich, Irish-accented voice. Eamon Blackwood appeared at Nora's side, handsome in his tuxedo, his hand coming to rest gently at the small of her back. The Lisbon project alone has generated 3 times the return of comparable new developments in the area. Julian's eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't realize... His gaze shifted between Nora and Eamon, reassessing everything. Eamon, this is Julian Hayes, Nora said calmly. We were at university together. Hayes, Eamon said, recognition flashing in his eyes. Nora had shared her history with him one night in Dublin, not in bitterness, but as part of explaining her journey. Your firm submitted a competing bid for the Boston Theater District project. If I recall, Julian nodded stiffly. We did. Your design was technically impressive, Eamon said graciously, though it would have required demolishing 3 of the 5 historic structures. Before Julian could respond, the event coordinator approached with an urgent expression. Winters, Mr. Blackwood, we're ready for you backstage. The presentation begins in 10 minutes. As they prepared to leave, Julian seemed to struggle for words. Finally, he managed, I had no idea you'd come so far, Nora. Nora looked at him directly, without anger or triumph, simply with the clarity of someone who had found her path. That was always the difference between us, Julian. I could see the potential in things others dismissed, even when those things were myself. As she walked away with Eamon, Julian's voice carried after her. Attempting to recover his composure, she was always determined, he said to someone nearby. I knew her when she was nobody in the field. Eamon paused, turning back slightly. His voice was low, but carried perfectly in the sudden lull of conversation. She was never nobody. Some people just weren't wise enough to see her worth. The room quieted as they continued toward the stage, where Nora would shortly be introduced as the visionary who had transformed architectural preservation from a niche concern into a global movement. As they waited in the wings, Amon squeezed her hand. Are you all right? He asked softly. Nora smiled, feeling not vindication, but a gentle sense of completion. Perfect, she replied. It feels like coming full circle. Beyond vindication, dome light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their New York hotel suite, casting a golden glow over the scattered newspapers and magazines that covered the coffee table. Each publication featured the Blackwood Winters Foundation's triumph at the Metropolitan Preservation Gala. The Architectural Review's headline read, Preservation Revolutionaries, How Winters and Blackwood Are Rewriting the Rules. Nora sat curled in an armchair, cup of tea in hand, watching the city wake up beyond the glass. The previous night's events played through her mind, not the encounter with Julian, which already felt like a footnote, but the overwhelming recognition of their work, the standing ovation that had followed her speech about architectural heritage as a living, breathing entity that deserved protection and evolution rather than demolition. You've been quiet, Eamon observed, emerging from the bedroom. In a hotel robe, he poured himself coffee from the silver service before joining her by the windows. Second thoughts about accepting the Tokyo project? Nora shook her head, just thinking about journeys. How we never really know where they'll lead when we start them. After the gala, they had received 3 new project proposals, including an ambitious initiative to restore a cluster of historical buildings in the heart of Tokyo. There, Foundation's approach preservation that honored history while serving present. Communities had transcended being merely trendy to become a movement, with global implications. Julian sent a message, she said, nodding toward her phone. He wants to meet to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Apparently, Hayes & Associates is interested in incorporating preservation elements into their developments. Iman raised an eyebrow. A convenient change of heart. You tell him. Our foundation would be happy to recommend several excellent preservation consultants. Nora replied with a small smile. But our focus remains on projects where preservation is the priority, not an afterthought. Iman leaned over to kiss her forehead. Growth without compromise. I'm proud of you. Later that morning, they walked through the theater district, where their foundation had rescued 5 historic playhouses from demolition. Each building had been meticulously restored and reimagined, one as a traditional theater, another as a community arts center, a third as a performing arts school for underprivileged youth. The project had revitalized the entire neighborhood, proving that preservation could be an economic engine rather than a nostalgic indulgence. "This one," Nora said, stopping before the smallest of the theaters. Its Art Deco facade, gleaming in the morning light. "This was the one I dreamed about saving in college. It's the one in my financially unrealistic proposal." Eamon looked at the building, then at Nora. "What did your professors say when you told them about the restoration?" "I didn't," Nora admitted. "Some journeys aren't about proving others wrong. They're about proving yourself right." As they continued their walk, Nora's phone buzzed with an email notification. The mayor's office was requesting a meeting to discuss implementing the foundation's preservation model across the city's historical districts. "It seems your vision has finally found its moment," Eamon observed as she shared the news. "Our vision," Nora corrected him. "I couldn't have done this alone. Would have found a way," he said with absolute certainty. "That's what I saw in you from the beginning, an architect of possibilities." That afternoon, they visited a struggling university to announce a new scholarship program funded by their foundation. The Architectural Heritage Fellowship would support students from disadvantaged backgrounds who showed promise in historical preservation and sustainable design. As Nora addressed the assembled students, she recognized reflections of her younger self in their eager, uncertain faces. "The most valuable structures," she told them, "are often the ones others fail to see the worth in. Your perspective, especially if it differs from the mainstream's, not a limitation. It's your greatest asset." After the presentation, a young woman approached Nora with a portfolio clutched to her chest. "Ms. Winters, your work is the reason I changed my major to architectural preservation. Everyone said I was making a mistake, that there's no future in it." Nora smiled, recognizing the familiar struggle. "What's your name?" "Olivia the girl," replied Olivia Martinez. "Well, Olivia Martinez," Nora said, taking the portfolio and opening it to find beautifully detailed sketches of abandoned buildings reimagined with new purpose. "I'd like you to apply for our summer internship program. These perspectives are exactly what we look for." The girl's face lit up with the special radiance that comes from being truly seen. That evening, Nora and Iman attended a small dinner with potential investors for their most ambitious project yet, a global initiative to identify and preserve endangered architectural treasures in developing regions. As conversations flowed around sustainable development and cultural heritage, Nora found herself seated next to Julian's wife, Vanessa. "I hope you don't mind my saying," Vanessa said quietly, "but Julian has been unusually reflective since the gala. He mentioned that he once underestimated you rather severely." Nora smiled. "We were very young. He's been reevaluating some of the firm's approaches," Vanessa continued. "Your speech about buildings having souls seemed to strike a chord. With him, growth is always possible," Nora replied diplomatically, "in people as well as structures." Later, as their car drove through the illuminated city, toward the airport for their overnight flight to Tokyo, Eamon studied Nora's profile in the passing lights. "You know what I find most remarkable about you?" he asked, taking her hand. "It was never about proving Julian wrong. Even when you had the perfect opportunity for vindication, you chose grace instead." Nora watched the city's skyline through the window, a harmonious blend of historical and contemporary structures, each with stories to tell. "Vindication is overrated," she said softly. "Building something that matters is what lasts." As the car merged onto the highway toward JFK, Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the scholarship student with unrealistic dreams to a woman whose vision was reshaping cities across the world. The path had not been what she expected, but it had led somewhere far more meaningful than any revenge fantasy could have offered. In the end, success wasn't about making others recognize your worth. It was about creating something so undeniably valuable that its worth spoke for itself.